What I did want to start with, though, was that I had a quick look at your Facebook profile, and I'll see if I can bring it up because unless you might remember. Do you remember what your banner at the top says?
Freedom. Is the ability to choose.
So I want to unpack that. What what does freedom mean to you? There are two questions in that, actually. What does freedom mean to you? And what's the story behind choosing that?
That's going to take us to some places.
That's okay. That's what we're here for.
I know, right?
I'll jump on the train. Let's go.
Yeah. It's starting to get hot in here. That my office doesn't get the sun till about this time of the day, and then when it does, it gets really hot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take my cardigan off before we start. That makes sense, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, interesting that you hit on that. Yeah. Because that goes right back to why I wrote my book, which is called Decide, Choose Your Own Path, which came out of the same story, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same life experience.
Did you want to talk about it? Are you comfortable talking about it?
Yeah, I will only go to places that I feel comfortable talking about. So, I came out of an abusive marriage. Mm-hmm. And then got sucked into an even more abusive relationship. So I hesitate to talk too much about the details of what went down in my marriage because, that involves my children. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
And so there are places about my marriage that I won't talk, right? Yeah.
So let's not go specifics. What about more the thoughts that you had about yourself, the feelings that you had about yourself? Let's not make it about them. Let's make it more about you.
Yeah.
What was it about you that put that up? Like, how were you feeling about yourself back then that obviously created those relationships in the first place?
Yes. And that goes right back to childhood, really. Yeah. Yeah. Goes right back to that need to fit in.
Yeah.
And it takes a lifetime to realize that you don't need to fit in, that you need to belong in your own skin. And yeah. So I mean, you're wise enough because this is obviously your work, you in your history too, I'm guessing. Or am I presuming too much there?
No. I went through massive trauma. That's what this whole entire podcast is coming out from, because I have lived in a very dark place where right at the core, I just felt like a worthless sack of shit. Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't worthy of being friends. I wasn't worthy of having loving relationships. I wasn't worthy of kindness. And this comes from, and none of them will agree with any of my statements, but this comes from my family just being unkind. They don't see it that way. They don't see it as being unkind. But for me, it was just a lot of emotional abuse. And then, it kind of started almost the day I was born, because my dad had an affair when my mom was pregnant with me. And my mom found out just before she gave birth. And then he left when I was 3 days old. So I was born into trauma. I was born into heartache. I was breastfed pain, grief, sadness, anger, confusion. Like every negative emotion you could ever imagine could go into a child, it went into me, because my mom was breastfeeding me she only did it for the first 3 months. But for that first 3 months, the relationship that I had with my mom was exactly that. And then something happened when I was 12, a major traumatic event. that I'm kind of like you. I don't like getting into the details because the person is still here and they see it very differently to how I see it. But still, it was a massive trauma for me. That is still going on because it was never resolved, and it was enabled by my mum and my dad. And they were allowed to get away with it, but it effectively ruined like the next 35 years of my life. I'm 47 now, and this happened when I was 12, and I'm only just kind of like really feel like I can face it, face the hurt, face the pain, face the sadness, face the abandonment, and just like even feel some of what happened when I was 12. It's hard. And so, yeah, I understand not wanting to talk about specifics, which is exactly why I said, can you talk more about how you felt, the impact? You can go wherever you want to go. I'm not going to push you anywhere you don't want to go. Just go wherever you're comfortable, and then I'll just lead it from there, because this is about you sharing your story kind of to help me and people in my situation who are still stuck in that, in the hurt, in the pain, trying to get out, trying to find a way out to the other side, trying to find forgiveness or compassion or healing or self-love. Like I wasn't raised in an environment with self-love. I was raised in an environment with a mother who was an alcoholic and a father who was a very aggressive born-again Christian who really believed that if you didn't go to church and you didn't follow the Bible, that you were going to hell. That's what I was raised believing, and I don't follow that belief system. So I was consistently punished for the fact that I didn't want to go to church, that I didn't want to give my life to the church, and I didn't, because I look at him and go, why would I? You're horrible. Like, why would I follow what you want to follow? You're just horrible.
If he had an affair, he's hardly living it himself.
I know, right? I didn't find out about the affair until only a couple of years ago, actually. It was only a couple of years ago I reached out after my mum died. I just kind of felt like I needed to reach out and get to know a little bit more about my dad. So yeah, I only recently found out about that.
Gosh.
So I understand. I do.
And you know, like I'm 64, so you know, I have been working on healing this for a very long time, and I won't say I help women heal through it, because that's not my area of expertise. I do help them find new lives and create the life they want out of the mess.
Yeah.
And healing comes through doing that a lot of the time. I don't claim to be able to heal people, because you do it yourself, really. And we are all whole and healed in ourselves. We need to claim that a lot of the time.
Yeah. It's all in there. I think it gets covered. It just gets covered with a whole pile of shit. It just gets like dumped on top of this pure, loving, wonderful part of us.
Yeah.
And it's just digging through the shit until you find it and go, oh, there it is.
Yeah. And like even your mother telling you at a younger age that your dad had an affair and why things were so traumatic as a child.
Well, she didn't tell me.
No, what I'm saying is that could have helped you a little bit to understand.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You know, and the gift in that is that she wasn't criticizing him, I guess, you know, as some parents do. Like there's gifts in everything. Yeah. We need to look for them. And I do believe that we go through the shit we go through, that on some level, before we were born, our soul chose that as part of our soul journey. And your dad would disagree with me on this, because family.
It's all right. He's either in heaven or hell. He's either with God or with the devil, according to him.
Well, let's hope he's where he wanted to be. You know, I believe that we sign up for it as part of our soul's growth journey, And the reason we go through it is that then we come to a choice point where, well, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to help other people? Or are you going to like stay wallowing in it as a victim forever? You know? Because we do have that choice. And you're using it to help people by doing this podcast.
You are right. There is a moment where we choose. And for me, that was actually about probably 4 weeks ago, just before I put the podcast up. Because I went through that. I can't keep wallowing in this shit. I can't spend my life wallowing in hell. It feels horrible. I'm making bad choices. I made a choice to buy this place, which was not ideal. And it was done from fear, and it was done from the victim. And now my daughter's suffering. I'm suffering because of it. And I cannot get us out of it right now. So it's like right in my face. And I made that choice a couple of weeks ago to go, no, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I have to stop being a victim. I have to find my way out, which is when the idea for the podcast came out, because I thought, I have been trying to get myself out of this for 17 years, ever since I was 30 when I woke up to like all of this, you know, our thoughts create our reality, and also how we feel and being a victim. And so I've been unraveling this for a long time, and then went through more trauma, and then just stopped. I had to stop. And I'm only just coming out the other side after probably between 5 to 8 years when the last trauma happened. And just coming out the other side now, going, I can't, like you, I can't do this anymore. I have to stop. So what was your moment, if you want to share? You certainly don't have to. What was your moment where you went, you know what, enough is enough? I need to stop being. Was there a trigger or a catalyst or something that you just had enough?
Yeah. And amongst that second relationship, where I got to the point where I couldn't even leave the house because I was just so traumatized and knew that I couldn't hold it together any longer when I met up with people. And at that point, I went through stages of, it'd be better if I wasn't here. How can I end this? And I figured out how to do it. And then I pulled myself up and thought, I can't do that. I've got 4 children, like they're all adults now. And yet if I do that, what message am I giving them? And I'm leaving them to have to clean up and deal with all the ginormous mess that was created in that second relationship. So that was that man has not only abused me in every physically and emotional and sexual way imaginable, but there's also been financial abuse in there as well, and a whole lot of stuff that, my kids were going to have to pick up the mess from and sort out if I chose to end my life. So I realized that was not an option, that I had to sort it. I had to deal with it. And it took me a long time to figure out, to actually get him to leave my house. Because those sort of men do not like taking instruction from anybody.
No. And so he has moved and you are left. What was your journey from that moment after he's left and you're there on your own to now? What was that? What are the kind of things that you had to push against? Because obviously there are a lot of beliefs that come out of, I've been in an abusive relationship. I understand there are a lot of beliefs that you pick up from that. And there's also, sometimes you come out like it just empty. There's nothing left. And you're just this hollow shell. There's no self-love. There's no self-acceptance. There's nothing. You're just devoid of everything. So what was your journey from that moment to now?
So that was about 6.5 years ago. And really that journey began about 3 years prior to that, when I had that moment and had to engineer a way to get him out of my house. That would actually be final. There was a business enterprise involved and a herd of cows involved, that, you know, I needed to get rid of the man and get rid of the cows on the same
A
day.
literal herd of cows.
No, you know, a couple of hundred. You know, like there was this entity that, and all of these other lives that really depended on me, because I was the one with the financial investment in it, and yet he was the one who, like, I couldn't do everything those animals needed without on my own, right? So I needed to be rid of him and them on the same day. So that was huge, was actually figuring that out. That was the beginning, was when I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I need to figure this out. And like I say, that took about 3 years. So then it was about, well, and amongst that time, there was the beating myself up. You know, how did you get yourself into this situation? How did you come out of a marriage as a strong, independent woman looking after 4 children and then get sucked in by an even worse man? So I needed to dissect that and figure out what it was. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes, I don't know if you've read any of her work, was very helpful in that. She describes that kind of man as a predator male. And she says, wherever there is beauty, wherever there is, you know, wisdom and love and all that, he will appear. And he will appear as the charmer, as the Prince Charming. I'm going to help you. I'll fix this in your house. I'll fix your children's car when it, you know, your daughter's car when it stops going, and I'll help your other child with this, and I'll do this, and I'll be there, you know, whenever you need help. And then gradually they wheedle their way in, and you're stuck before you know it. And so once I had kind of owned that I played a part in that, it was about, how do I forgive myself for that? You know, and I learned that true forgiveness is not about forgiving him. It's about forgiving me for allowing that to happen, because whether we're aware of it, like I wasn't at the time when he connived his way in, and yet I accepted his help each time he offered it. So I was playing an active part in it. And so forgiving myself for that, and actually owning that I wasn't. So we can, and I did for a while, get stuck in that I'm a victim. It's all his fault. And what I've learned for myself is that when I do that, I actually give away my power to change. I give away my power to have any influence in that situation. So owning that I played a part in that, owning the parts that I did play, and then forgiving myself for that. And I found Ho'oponopono to be really helpful in that. And it is a Hawaiian practice where you say you're sorry. So, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. So you're almost asking yourself to forgive yourself, to forgive your inner child, your inner being. Thank you for what I learned from that. You know, there are always lessons in there. And then affirming that you love yourself. And I went through, so in that 3 years, I was still actively involved with the cattle, milking cows, you know, every day. So I would go through an entire milking, often milking cows, just repeating those phrases. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, without any specifics. And I found that actually shifted the way I felt about myself.
I was going to ask how you did the forgiveness. So I'm so glad that you shared that, because I wanted to know what because sometimes people say you need to forgive and let go, and then that's all they say. It's like, yes, but but where's the how in that?
Yeah, and I can't be doing with just forgive and let go. Like, tell me what I need to do, right? Because I love, like, I'm very spiritual, very intuitive, and I'm also very practical. I need the practical. What do I actually do, right? So
yes,
you can get really specific in amongst those 4 phrases. You can add as much detail in there as you like. You can write whole forgiveness letters to yourself or to the other person and then burn them. Like, forgiveness does not mean that you ever have to ring that abuser up and tell them you forgive them and tell them you love them.
Yeah.
And
you're not forgiving them for them, you're forgiving them for you.
Yes.
It's not letting them know that you've forgiven them. And that kind of makes the forgiveness a little bit easier. No, I'm not doing it for them, I'm doing it for me.
Because often if you actually did, and I wouldn't suggest anyone did that with a person like that, but even if a friend or a family member does something that you feel is wrong or has hurt you in a way, oftentimes you'll find that if you attempt to have a conversation with them about it, they will have forgotten that incident. Yeah. And you're hanging on to it and the hurt. And so forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about you and what you're hanging on to. And if you think about it visually, if we're holding on to all that hurt and all the wounds that we've, all those incidents, how many suitcases are we dragging along behind us as we walk through life?
Yeah.
And do we really want to be still doing that? And for me, that was a decision that no, I didn't.
And also realizing that sometimes we can kind of misinterpret the cause as well. I know for a lot of us, especially people that have been doing this work for a while, we kind of have this belief that we know why the person did what they did. We know, and a lot, narcissist is a big word that gets thrown around a lot in relationships.
Yes.
But I would not ever call any of my exes narcissists, because I look at it and I go, well, I don't actually know if they knew what they were doing. I don't know what their intention was behind what they did. And also I could completely misinterpret the entire situation. So I'll share a story with you if I can. That trauma that happened to me when I was 12, I recently spoke to a family member who shared what she heard about why this thing happened the way it did. And what she heard about why it happened the way it did was completely different to why I understood why something happened the way it did. And my understanding was that it was my fault. I was the reason this happened. And so I have carried that. This is my fault. I did something wrong. As a 12-year-old, as a kid, when something happens, it's very natural for kids to go, this is about me. I've done something wrong. I'm the reason this has happened. But in actual fact, it apparently had nothing to do with me. It was trauma that happened to this person in a completely different way from a completely different situation. But I interpret it to be about me. My mum and my dad did not help that, because he told me I was a terrible child and that's why it did happen. So he didn't help that situation at all. But it's so easy for us to have these beliefs and these stories that we hold on to, thinking that we know why something has happened the way it's happened. And we just, like you said, we're carrying these bags around with us everywhere, believing that we're right, when in actual fact, well, maybe it's possible we might not be right. So in that, like, for me, forgiveness came once I accepted maybe my interpretation about all these different traumas and things that had happened to me weren't exactly the way they happened. Maybe my brain created, this is when I was younger, I'm not talking as an adult. Maybe my brain created a story around it. So forgiveness is really, really interesting, because you kind of have to forgive yourself. But for me, I also had to forgive the misinterpretations that I made. Yes. And the assumptions that I made and the judgments that I made along the way.
Because we do. And your point about stories, so as humans, we are meaning making machines, and we create a story about everything. So if you took any incident that happens in life, whether it's you and one other person and something happens, you'll have your story about what happened, the other person will have theirs, and somewhere in the middle are actually the facts of what happened.
Yeah.
And when you get a situation that involves more than two people, imagine how many stories you've got.
Yeah.
And so it is unraveling, owning that the story we've created about an incident, and we do this as adults as well. It's not, although as a child, you're right, we do presume that it's all our fault. Because we are the center of our world as a child. We really are. And so that whole story thing, yes, it's that plays a really big impact. And that is where, you know, when you have a really an incident that, or an event or a trauma, whatever, call it what you will, that keeps coming back up, it can be really helpful to use that Ho'oponopono process and actually write a letter about it. So, you know, you might end up with a paragraph under each of those. You might end up with several pages. You might end up with just a few words. You know, I've done it in all different ways when I have felt I really needed to go deep and actually kind of figure out why this was still playing so big in my mind. And that I have found very helpful as well. So it is just kind of listening to your intuition as to your gut, your inner wisdom as to how am I going, what is going to work here for me to forgive this? And initially, like I say, for me, it just started with reciting those 4 phrases over and over and over and over and over and over again, and something shifted. And I was doing that internally, like in my head, like no one else in the cow shed knew it was happening.
Yeah. I have used it. It is powerful. And so once you went through that process and your partner's gone and the cows have gone and you've had a shift, where do you go from there? Because obviously, was there any fear that you were going to then go into another relationship? Did you have to kind of dig for the beliefs around that created the relationships, which obviously, as you said, then that goes into your childhood and what happened in your childhood and those anchored beliefs, without going into too much detail, because I understand it can sometimes be really personal. What were the feelings that you kind of uncovered and then what did you do with those?
So when I went right back and uncovered, it was that I wasn't good enough, that I was a nuisance, and that goes right back to my birth and pre my birth, the stories that I've been told, you know, that I was a nuisance. Nothing happened as it was meant to, and, you know, I was just annoying, really, and I never fitted in. I never did anything right. And so there was this, I grew up with this, with being torn, really. Like I really wanted to rebel and cause a lot of trouble because my natural curiosity makes me want to question anyone. So if anyone gives me an instruction, which, you know, my mother did, I was the middle child. So I have an older brother and I was the middle one. So being the older daughter, I was the maid, the Cinderella child that did all the work around the house, all the chores. And so I would question, you know, well, why does that need done? And why does it need that done that way? You know, and it was always this conflict between me and my mother because she would want it done her way and I would invariably be able to figure out ways that it could be done differently or easier or better, or I don't know where my kid brain went with that. But it was like this I wanted to rebel and either not do it or do it my way, and yet I wanted to fit in and be accepted. So I was kind of doing this big sway dance, if you like. And then I did. So I kind of lived that, and then went through a stage in my 20s where I was like, okay, so it's time to, get married and have children and all that, which was the expected thing in small town New Zealand in those days. And so I did all of that, right? And then, I've kind of done all this fitting in. And I didn't know who I was. So I came out of that second relationship and it was like, phew, I've got my house to myself. Because it was my house, not our house. And yet I still didn't feel kind of safe that he wouldn't come around, like I was kind of very protective, and I'd lock the doors and all that kind of stuff. And so there was that fear for a while. And there was also well, who am I now? I'm not going to get into another relationship, not until I sort myself out. So I made a commitment to myself that I was going to figure out who I was and heal before I even contemplated another relationship.
And that seems like such a good idea until you're 10 years in and you go, damn, what was I thinking?
Well, because I'd made that second mistake, gone into that second relationship, and it was so traumatic in so many ways. I knew that I was in no fit state to offer anything to anyone, and that chances are I would end up in a worse relationship if I went there. So, yeah, common sense kicked in, and I did commit to myself really for the first time ever. And then so there was this freedom, and now I can do things my way, and yet there was still this lingering, well, nothing I do is good enough, nothing I do is right. How do I know if any of the choices I make are right? And so that was a whole process. And who am I? What's important to me? And how do I make decisions that I'm willing to own the consequences of? Because when it's just me making the decisions, it's only me that is responsible for the outcomes.
Yep. I really want to unpack all of that. So what did you do? How did you take responsibility? How did you figure out who you were? Because I agree with you, after any kind of trauma, but for most of us, because we've all really been through childhood trauma, I think we're all coming out the other side going, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I enjoy. I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what makes me happy. I don't know anything about myself. So how did that look for you, figuring out, unpacking all of that? How do you go from that low self-worth to it really is. And
it really is a lot.
It is.
And so by that stage, I had trained as a coach because I had, coming out of my marriage, which was, a good 15 or more, good 15 years prior to that, I had gone through several counsellors, none of whom helped me in the way that I was looking for help. I was looking for, how do I move forward? And they were like, well, come back down in this deep, dark hole and we'll figure out why you got there. And I'm like, no, I already clawed my way out of there, right? I'm not going back down there. And counselling works wonderfully for some people, didn't work for me. And so, and yet in amongst all of that, I had made a commitment to myself to find a way that I could help other women like me either get out of that hole or not get into it in the first place, and yet in amongst that create lives they wanted for them and their families. And so I had done probably around 2/3 of counsellor training, thinking I'll do this my way, like hangover from childhood, and then figured out that that was never going to work in the system, so I gave that up. I then was in business for myself because I found that working around 4 children and after school activities and school holidays, it was the only way to kind of have things function well. And so I was already in business. I met up with a life coach, and that woman literally changed my life. Like, she showed me how to move forward out of that deep, dark hole. And then I thought, okay, so if I could learn that and my business skills, I can really help women. So that kind of set me off down the track of figuring out how to do it, how to figure out what's important to me. And out of all of that came my book, Decide, Choose Your Own Path, which is pretty much my journey of learning how to make decisions that I was willing to stand by. Mm-hmm. And the way that I have, before I wrote the book, had helped a whole heap of women, and obviously have since. So I knew that it worked, right? And a lot of that starts with really having a firm foundation that you build your life on. So who am I? What's important to me? You know, why am I here? And I had figured some of that out in amongst my, so I'm kind of going all over the place here, apologies, hopefully it's going to come together. In amongst my marriage, when I realized that it wasn't going to work, I then had to, I chose one day to reassess what my role was as a mother. Because no longer was it, well, I want this really happy family with a happy marriage and happy kids and all the rest, because that wasn't going to work, right? Mm-hmm. So what was it? What was my purpose in mothering? So I knew that. I was very clear about that. And that kind of, if you like, transferred over into, you know, the next phase. Well, so what's my purpose now? What am I doing? I'm here to help women. What do I believe? What's important to me? So it comes down to your values. What's important to you? And are you willing to stand on your values? You know, and one of mine is freedom, which is my ability to choose anything my heart desires. That's my definition of freedom. It's different for a lot of people. We're getting really clear about how that shows up in your life. Means that then when you make choices and decisions, does it help me with that?
I have to ask, I don't have to, but I really want to. How much was that belief challenged over the last 3 years?
Oh, incredibly. Mm. Because, you know, the you can't leave your house. Well, who are you to tell me I can't leave my house?
I know, right? Who do you think you are? On what planet do you think I can't leave my house?
Exactly. And the gift in that, Kaylee, was that freedom isn't actually an external thing. It's not anything that anyone can grant you or take away from you. It's inside of me. It's inside of you if you choose for it to be. And it is my ability to choose how I'm going to respond to anything.
But I get really confused about this because there wasn't really a choice, though. It's not like you could leave your house. I mean, yes, it's so funny. My daughter constantly says to me, Mum, you have the freedom to choose whatever you want. I'm like, I do, but there's a really strong chance that if I make that choice, I'm probably going to end up in jail.
Mm.
So is that really a freedom of choice, or is it not a freedom of choice? And to end up in jail just for leaving your house seems absolutely ridiculous and barbaric. But it happened for a lot of people over here.
It did.
And so that whole, like, I don't understand. I probably would have understood it a heck of a lot better had the last 3 years not happened, because we didn't have so much of our freedom removed.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of keen to understand that more. Like, how can you hold on to the belief of freedom when at any time that freedom can be removed? And so I don't quite understand what you mean by freedom is an external thing. It's like, yeah, and it is how you perceive it. But I could perceive, well, I have a right to go outside and then get arrested and go to jail and then have my freedoms actually removed. So I'm really challenged by that. And I don't know if you can kind of explain that more so I can find peace with it.
I find it really, really challenging not being able, like, it really questioned. And I guess I was blessed in a lot of ways, and that I work from home anyway. So, you know, there was still things like I couldn't go out whenever I chose to. There were things I couldn't do. And yet I did feel blessed that most of my life continued on as it had. You know, yeah, it is a tough one though. It's been really tough on people. And that freedom, and yet freedom is like, it is a physical freedom. It is a, well, I want to go there, why can't I? And yet we never have total freedom in that area, do we? Because you can't just go and enter your neighbor's house without knocking on the door. Like, you don't have that amount of freedom, right? You still have freedom over your body and how you choose to respond to things and how you choose to be and how you choose to show up. Yeah, it is like, we could have a whole conversation about that in the last 3 years, couldn't we?
I think every person I talk to, we could have a huge conversation, because there's so much in there. There's so much in it. There are so many lessons and so much learning. And I kind of want to thank you, because what I just got, which kind of just fell down and anchored in, was that even prior to the last 3 years, we had limitations. There've always been limitations. It's just that they weren't stuck so clearly in front of our face. But you can't just walk into a shop and take whatever you want and then not pay for it, because otherwise you'll end up in jail. Like, there's always this outcome of punishment, which I find fascinating in itself. Is that anytime you do something that does not match the rule book, you will get punished for it. And that's not a new thing over the last 3 years. That has been here forever.
Yes.
Like, forever. If you step outside the rule book, you will get punished. That's not freedom. And what I just heard is that there's this misinterpretation, or I've had this misinterpretation, that freedom was about what you could do externally. It was all about the external world, whereas it's actually not. The freedom, and true freedom, is realizing that you get to either accept or reject the rules that are in front of you. You can reject them and go and do what you want, and then there are consequences to that. Or you can accept them and live the best way that you possibly can within the rules and limitations that you have. That's the freedom. The freedom is how you actually respond to those rules and limitations, not the rules and limitations themselves.
Yes. And the freedom is how you choose to be in every moment.
Yeah.
You know, so for you and I, because of the trauma we've been through in our past, we could choose to be sitting in a corner, moping, feeling sorry for ourselves, and never doing the internal work to heal and become whole, so that we can break that cycle in our families, right? And make our lives different and help other people.
Yeah.
You know, we're making those choices all the time. And for me too, there's a big difference between, am I going to react? Am I going to make a knee-jerk reaction? Or am I going to pause and choose how I respond? Because the freedom is in that pause.
Yes, and either accept or reject. Yeah, you're right. I feel like my brain needs a minute to just integrate that piece of wisdom. Because when you raise with, maybe not even when you raise with trauma, but just in my kind of limited bubble, everything is about, I was kind of raised to believe that everything is about the external world, that you always look at the external world and how the external world impacts you, and how your emotions are based on the external world. What you say is based on the external world. Your actions are based on the external world. Whereas I get the feeling where you're heading is that none of that is based on the external world. The external world happens, but you get to choose everything that goes on in your internal world. That is a choice. Whether you sit as a victim, whether you go and be empowered, whether you go and be in a wallowing or sadness or negativity. And it's really interesting, because for me, up until very recently, I wasn't 100% sure that that was a choice. I wasn't sure that the negativity, that I had a choice to stop it, that I had a choice for it to not be so all-encompassing, because it just seems to dominate so much of my brain. It's, for me, it was almost as if there was no positivity in there. There was no think about the good, appreciation, forgiveness. None of that was in there. My brain was so dominated with negative thoughts. It was just constantly either punishing me or punishing other people. And for a long time, I didn't think I could ever. And even up, and I think it was about 3 weeks ago, before I had that moment where I shifted, it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was outside, something had happened. I'd hurt myself doing something, and I was outside and I was walking around going, maybe this is it. Maybe my life is just shit. Maybe this is all I have. Maybe I'm never getting off this property. Maybe I'm going to end up on a pension. Maybe I'm going to end up losing everything. Like, maybe this is just my punishment for existing. And that was kind of the voice that was going on. There was no hope or any of those sorts of things in there. It really was, maybe this is just my lot in life. And it was actually and that takes me back to my mum, the day before or 2 days before she died. I was with her and we were having a conversation, because she had a hard life. She had a hard life, and it was really horrible for most of her life. And we were talking, and she looked at me and she said, maybe this was just my lot in life. Maybe I was just meant to have a hard life. And I remember looking at her and just thinking, I don't think you had to have this life. And I think that was one of my first waking moment, was when my dad died. That was the first time I really woke up. The second was when my mum died. And I looked and I went, surely this can't, both times, both my parents died. Surely this can't be it. Surely this cannot be what life is. Like, surely it can't be this bad. And having these conversations, and this conversation with you is just, I'm sat here and I've gone, it doesn't have to be that bad. It doesn't matter how old you are. There is always a point where you can see a negative thought and take a minute to look at it and go, you know what? Excuse my language, but I do this at the moment, is I look at that negative thought and I go, you know what? You can just fuck off. Yep. Just fuck off. Not playing that game right now.
Say to those negative thoughts, because they will. So our brains are hardwired to respond negatively.
Yeah.
Because of eons of needing to watch out for the poisonous snakes and the poisonous spiders, as you do in Australia and don't in New Zealand, to know which ones you have to be careful of. And I'm sure that your daughter even knows which ones to watch out for in the grass when she's out playing, right? So we are wired like that.
Mm.
And so our brains go to that negative. And we have in that part of our brain, there's a gang of 10 saboteurs who run our mind and our brain until we choose to take control of them.
I feel like it's more than 10, maybe 10,000.
I've done research, there's 10. And so, yeah. Something you said earlier about how, your parents, were they meant to have a hard life like that? We come into this world as perfectly formed little babies, right? Innocent. And we have our physical DNA that we see. We also have an energetic DNA that we don't see. And so what happens is that will get kind of changed and molded and conditioned by society as we're habituated to be who the people around us want us to be, our families, our schools, our social settings. Everybody has their say in, what's appropriate for us and what's not. Mm-hmm. As you said earlier, we all come to this moment where we realize, and I want to say this, that, you said everybody goes through trauma as a child. Yes, we do. There would not be a child who would not be able to identify a moment of trauma. Sometimes that carries on right through our adulthood until we decide we've had enough. And that moment when we decide we've had enough is when we start to wonder who we really are, right? And if people haven't had a whole bulk of trauma in their adulthood, they're still going to have that moment, because we go through life and we make mistakes and we learn lessons and we try things while we're figuring out who we are, because who we came into the world as has been changed and molded, right? And then we've done let's try and fit in, or let's really rebel when we're a teenager and a young adult. And then we come back to that moment of, who am I? And you asked earlier how I figured that out. So I kind of dilly-dallied in lots of different ways of finding that out until I met up with numerology. And because numerology is based only on your date of birth and not on any questions that you have to answer, there's no second guessing it. And for me, that was like, I really, I remember feeling myself relax into my body. So that's who I am. And I recognized in that moment that lots of the things that had been squished in me as a child are actually my gifts. And I've watched that happen in my clients as well. That when I share their numerology with them, their energetic DNA, that it's visible. They feel it in their bodies. It's like this visceral shift of recognizing who you are and why you're here.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. That happened to me when I found out I was an 11, and I just went, oh, damn. Damn.
Nothing wrong with being an 11.
Well, that depends on which perspective you're looking at it from. But when I was looking at it, it was oh, damn, that's not good.
Yeah, and so energy exists in a continuum, right? And so 11 has a whole realm of possibilities, and you get to choose where you show up in it. And of course, 11 is just the really top superficial, like it's a toe dip. There's so many layers to your individuality. And we also, I don't know if you've towed it into Book of Life, Egyptian numerology, where we also have a birth card.
Oh, I've not.
And it's based on, the plain deck of cards that we know. And so your 11, your birth code, is your personality. It's how you view the world. Your birth card is your work in the world, your journey, your soul's growth and journey through the world. And that's the one that I believe our soul raised its hand when that job description was put up on the board and said, yeah, I'll do that.
Yep, I'm up for that. Bring it on.
I'm up for that, And then my soul probably said, yep, I'll go and I'll put up with this, that, and this, and then I'll do this. Like that was the end goal. And that's, I have this belief that we go through all the stuff we go through, and then we have a choice of to whether we're going to use it to help others or whether we're not.
Yeah.
And I believe we go through it so that we can help others in similar situations.
Yeah, I was talking to someone, I can't remember who it was, on the podcast actually. It was a couple of days ago, and she had the very similar perspective of she had gone through what she went through on the level, because she had gone through a lot, like a massive trauma. And she was able to find the healing, realizing that if it wasn't for her having gone through what she went through and the women that she had helped because of it, then maybe they would have gone through their trauma without ever being helped.
Mm-hmm.
And so she really saw it as a gift. As she said, I'm now on the other side of my trauma, and I'm really able to see it as a gift, because I can see that because I went through what I went through, I am now able to help so many women on their journey come out the other side of the same trauma.
And I second that. I would not be the woman I am today if I hadn't been through all the trauma I went through. I would not be able to help women in the ways that I do today if I hadn't been through all of that.
That is definitely one side to look at it, but then I kind of come in and go, yeah, but if we'd been born in a family that was kind and loving and thoughtful and generous, and we didn't go through any trauma, and then we were able to have kind, happy, loving, thoughtful, generous lives, would that not be better? Would that not be better than having to go through darkness and trauma and hell and despair and worthlessness and all this other sort of stuff, to then be able to help people? It's like, well, wouldn't it be better if we all just lived in a happy land of, like my daughter said, Mum, life would be better if money wasn't a thing and everything was just free and we all loved each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right. And yet that isn't the world we live in because of the society that we've been born into. And, for your daughter's ideal to happen, which I must admit, I used to say that to my dad over and over and over again as a kid. Why can't life be, all these rosy things and everything just be sweet, And it's going to take a lot of us to change that in the world.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to happen in my lifetime. It would be somewhat of an absolute miracle for that to happen.
Maybe it might happen, next time our soul comes to earth.
Maybe. Or if my daughter has her way, we're going to live forever. So if we live forever, it will happen in my lifetime.
Well, indeed.
This has been so amazing. Is there anything else that you kind of feel like you really want to share that you want to share before you get off, that you think is an important, valuable piece of information?
I really want to reinforce that we at any moment have the right to choose, and the right to choose us. And I also want to unpack a little bit that so many of us in our situations who've been through trauma have had this self-love. If you just loved yourself, everything would be fine, right? You know, it's kind of been, and to me, again, that's how am I meant to do that? You know, for me, that starts, what I've learned is it starts with trusting me, which I couldn't do for a long time because of situations and trauma. And so, you know, am I doing what I say I'm going to do for me? Am I taking time to have a shower each day? Am I sitting down to drink my coffee rather than gulping it down at the bench while I'm cooking dinner or making breakfast or whatever? You know, am I looking after me? Can I trust myself that if I say I'm going to do this for me, that I actually do it? And each time we do keep our promises, keep our word to ourselves, it's like we're putting another stone on our stack of trust and confidence, because trust, confidence, and self-love do this little dance together. And so each time we put a trust stone on there, we've added to our confidence. We've affirmed that we're important, that we love ourselves. And each time we don't, we've knocked some stones off. So it's gathering that evidence of when you've taken care of yourself and done what you've said you're going to do for you.
I feel like you've just opened up another 2 hours of conversation.
I know. Apologies for that. And, you know, I really wanted to add that piece in, because for women in situations who, you know, who may be listening to this on their way out, like I battled with that self-love thing, how to do it, for years until I discovered that. And yeah, I mean, we can have another conversation another day about that if you want to.
I would love that. Because it's
really important.
It's the trust. It's I get that it is the self-love, but it's not the self-love, because the self-love comes naturally. But for me, it's the trust. It's because I went through a traumatic birth with my daughter. I really stopped being able to trust in my physical body's ability. Like I stopped trusting in me, and I stopped trusting in my body, because it was scary. It was a scary thing to go through. And also, when you're not, as we know, you're not raised by people that you can trust. If you're abused in any way, physically or emotionally, I now am of the firm belief that both of them are as equally damaging as the other. If you're abused physically or emotionally by your family, the people that, according to television, according to all the shows that we grew up watching, are meant to love you, nurture you, look after you, care for you, feed you, clothe you, give you the best life possible. If they're the ones that are abusing you, you don't have any trust. And then that comes out in, well, then you attract partners that you can't trust, and then you attract friends that you don't trust. So then you end up in abusive relationships with partners, but then you also end up with abusive relationships with friends. Yes. And then you pick bad jobs, and then you have terrible bosses, or you move to places that aren't places you probably ever really want to live. Or like there's just this, it just comes out in so much when you don't trust yourself, because then you end up constantly questioning your choices. You don't make decisions because you don't know whether the decision you're going to make is right or wrong. So then you kind of don't make decisions, and then you don't do anything until you're actually forced to do something, or fear pushes you into doing something. It's just such a big experience.
It is.
Building trust. And I want to thank you for sharing that. It is, do you have a shower every day? So have you committed to having a shower every day? I don't have a shower every day. We're on tank water. I'm permanently in fear of running out of water because we're on tank water and we're in Australia. I mean, come on.
I'm not using that. I'm not suggesting that as a way to judge yourself. I'm just saying, what commitments have you made to yourself, and are you keeping them?
Because exactly, yeah.
if you can't trust yourself, you don't value yourself, you don't love yourself. And so it all comes back to that self-trust. It's not trusting externally. Everything starts with you. And when we've been through trauma, we give all of that away. We give all of our power away. And so we need to take that back a little bit at a time. And I believe that the rock base of it is that self-trust, that everything comes from that.
And the kicker with that is when you've been through trauma and you have a low self-worth and you make the commitment. So I made the commitment to do an exercise regime probably about 2 months ago. I did it for 5 days, and then something happened, and then it was really hot. We had like a week of hot days, and I thought, I can't exercise in this heat. This is horrendous. So then 2 months on, I haven't done it since. And it's almost as if they're not, you need to learn how to trust yourself, but they're not trusting yourself is also a pattern, and it's also a sabotage, and it's also a belief, and it's attached to a story, and it's a program. Like, it's all of it. So it just takes such a deep strength to make the decision to do something and then follow through with it. And if you are a weak person, which interestingly enough, I watched something from Mel Robbins yesterday, and she was talking about goals, and she put her hands up and she said, you know what, I am a weak person. If I have coffee in the house, I'm going to drink it. If I have sugar in the house, if I have chocolate in the house, I'm going to eat it. She said, I take these things out of the house because I know if there's gluten and dairy in the house, I'm going to eat them because I am a weak person. I have this weak center that I just haven't built yet. And I look at that and I go, I'm the same. But mine is for doing things for myself. So it's not, I restrict very easily, which is why I have an eating disorder, because I'm very good at restricting. But it's the giving that I have the issue, the giving myself the yoga, the giving myself the meditation, the giving myself the showers, the giving myself the bath, the giving myself the exercise, the giving of myself the nurturing food, the food that's actually going to nurture my physical body. It's the giving to myself that I really struggle with. The restricting and the denying, I can deny sugar, I can deny gluten, dairy, alcohol. Haven't drunk ever anyway since I was a teenager. The alcohol or the smoking or the drugs, like that was easy for me to give up and deny. But the giving is real challenge, a real challenge.
Which is actually the ability to receive.
Yeah. Which is also why I don't have any money, because to receive money, you have to be open to receive. Like, you have to be open to receive money. And if you're not open, it's like your funnel is like this big.
And when we've received trauma, we shut ourselves off. We don't give ourselves permission to receive until we get really strong. And, you know, I'm going to challenge your presumption that you're a weak person, because I would say that you're a very courageous woman to have gone on the healing journey that you have gone on and to be posting this podcast. That takes courage.
Thank you.
That takes real inner strength. And, you know, the exercise that you gave up on, you have evidence that you could do that for 5 days in a row. True. And so you can trust yourself that you can do it. So you can see it as a failure that this is where choice comes in, right? You can choose to view that as, well, I let myself down, or you could choose to say, I did that for 5 days, and then this happened and that happened, and when am I going to start again? Yeah. And then that changes the story that you're telling yourself about it, right?
It's a really good shift in perspective. such a good conversation. I'm so glad I brought that up.
Yes, such a good conversation.
Can you, I know you talked about your book, so can you share the details of your book, your website?
Yes, so my website is my name, daphnewells.com, and there is a page on there which will take you to various retailers depending on where you live to buy my book. It's on there, so that's the best place to find out about me. And you can there's lots of resources and things on there, so please take advantage of that and reach out if you want to have a conversation about any of the things that we've talked about.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This is my pleasure. If you could please like and subscribe to this channel, I would really, really, really appreciate it. If you would like help coming into a space of awareness, if you would like support, and you would like just some encouragement, or you just want to have a conversation with me, go to lovecreatesfreedom.com. It will redirect to a Facebook group where I am doing free mentoring. And if you do want to donate because you are loving this and you understand this entire world functions around money, I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mwah.